I'm curious to get your breakdown then. So just for people who haven't read the book yet, what is from a macronutrient? So we'll start there, even though I really want to get into the micronutrients. What do you typically recommend for a macronutrient ratio for somebody who's pregnant?
So it's a good question because I tend not to work top down from macros. And
Okay. Oh, that's right. You just said you do the
well,
opposite.
I'll answer your question though. But
Okay.
to go back to that conference, even somebody recommending 20 to 30% carbs, that's like unheard of, like low in the conventional sphere. Like the conventional recommendations are 45 to 65% of your
Wow.
calories from carbohydrates. If
Hmm.
you're in the 65% of calories from carbohydrates group, you are by default going to be deficient in either protein or fat, arguably
Right.
both, and a lot of the micronutrients that you
Hmm.
find in said foods that are rich in protein and fat, right? So first of all, I guess a kudos to that person for even recommending that range because
Yeah.
sure, you're going to meet your micronutrient needs that way, but it's not because of the carbohydrate foods. It's because you're not displacing your other nutrient-dense foods with empty carbs.
Hmm.
So my recommendations do tend to be in terms of carbs, like 20 to 30% isn't too far off. Sometimes I
Hmm.
might go a little lower for somebody with blood sugar issues, maybe down to like 15% carbs. I really base that on I figure out the protein and fat requirements first, but B, I'm looking at blood sugar management in pregnancy and
Hmm.
also what ancestrally like hunter-gatherer populations consume. And there was a pretty large study that looked at over 200 hunter-gatherer populations, and most of them eat somewhere between 16 to 22% of their calories from carbs. You have a little more when you're more equatorial and you have fruit available year round, and less when you're like in the Arctic and plants don't grow in the winter. So
Yeah. Right.
you're eating more animal foods by default. As far as protein, I try not to go below 20% protein. You really do need a significant amount of protein. The more accurate way to measure protein would be in grams per kilogram. And the first ever study we had on protein requirements specifically in pregnant women was done in 2015. And they found the current recommendations in late pregnancy underestimate true protein requirements by 73%. So you're
Wow.
looking at more of like the protein needs of a typical athlete is what you would want to aim for in pregnancy. And then the remainder of it comes from fat. And
Hmm.
sometimes this scares people, but that can work out to be like 50% or more of your diet coming from fat. And people are,
Hmm.
I even had a message just this week, like, I can't wrap my mind around my diet coming from half fat. Like, people don't realize that if you try to eat less than like 30% of calories from fat, you're like starving and like cooking with only a teaspoon of oil at a time. That's because fat is in a lot of our foods. All of
Hmm.
our protein foods have fat. All of your nuts and seeds have fat. Your avocado has fat. All your animal products have fat. I mean, they come in there naturally, and usually they're
Hmm.
packaged naturally in protein-rich foods. So this doesn't mean like eating a stick of butter or something just for the
Right.
heck of it. It
Hmm.
means cooking with like a normal amount of fat at your meals, which might feel high for some people who don't cook more traditionally, but like, a few tablespoons or something when you're sauteing your greens or whatever, not cutting the fat off of your steak, eating the skin on your chicken, consuming, if you eat dairy products, full fat dairy products, not taking the yolks out of your eggs. And then when you are having snacks and things, making sure there's some source of fat with it, such as avocado or the fat that's in sardines or nuts and seeds, almond butter, whatever. That naturally, without eating a ton of fat, easily gets you to 50% of your calories coming from fat. If you eat a
Hmm.
sufficient amount of protein-rich foods and don't take all the fat out of it, you're naturally going to be eating that much, and there's no need to like nitpick it, so to speak. So a
Right.
lot of my focus in terms of people actually like getting an appropriate amount of macros for them for pregnancy, the main thing you prioritize is hitting your protein from unprocessed foods and then sort of filling in the gaps with carbs per your appetite or your blood sugar tolerance without crazy nitpicking it, because there's going to be
Hmm.
differences. You're going to have athletes who need more carbs than somebody who's more sedentary. You're going to have somebody with blood sugar issues who needs fewer carbs than somebody else with really great metabolic health. And so there's a lot of wiggle room within there as long as you're not skimping on the protein.
Yeah, and I think for for anybody who kind of hears like some of the percentages and the, the grams per kilogram and stuff, and that stresses them out, I think, just when you eat a real food diet, you naturally end up with macronutrients like this, which is, I think how
Yes.
you explained it. Like when you started looking at ancestrally what the appropriate diet is, this is just kind of where you ended up with macros. So I think that's an approach that women can take too, is just if you eat real whole foods, because even if you're, like you said, protein sources are rich in fat. And especially when we're getting them naturally occurring, like, yes, if you go buy, just white chicken meat that's had all of the fat shredded off, but, that's less of a real food than what you would actually be getting if you're getting a true real food product. So I think it's a lot easier. You can just, focus on eating those real foods. You're going to end up being at a better macronutrient ratio, especially compared to what our current recommendations are.